Well, here we go again. Last week we unpacked the slippery slope of being chosen, and through this week in conversations, sort of remind me. Some of you know I loved downhill skiing, and once you get on top of the mountain, there's only one way to go, and that's down, and you've got to decide how you're going to get there. And that's sort of the way it is with being chosen. You're sort of on top of the mountain, but the only way to go is the way we talked about last week, because you begin to feel really special. You begin to realize you've got some privileges, and then you feel superior, and then it's over. Once you feel superior, that's what leads to violence of all kinds, whether or not you're a superior nation, a superior race, a superior religion. Doesn't make any difference. Once you take that journey, that's where you end up. And we talked a lot about the church, and what I want to remind us about this morning is that I'm the church and you're the church and we're the church together. So whenever we talk about the church, we're really talking about you and me. I mean, because when you put us together, we're the church. And so, but I want to personalize our journey this week and make it very, very personal in terms of our own journey of faithfulness. And faithfulness really begins with the experience of God's love. Happens to different people in different ways. Sometimes a sudden conversion, sometimes a gradual experience of exposure, sometimes through learning. And but we experience God's love in some way. And what I want to challenge us to understand is we've got a choice in terms of our understanding of our own journey. For as we looked at last week, one way that we can take the journey is to say, I am chosen, therefore I'm special, therefore I have privileges, I have promises, and finally, I am superior. Many people take that journey. But on the other hand, there is an alternative, and that is, I am sent. I am an equal with everyone. I am free to love. There's nothing that prohibits me in any circumstance to love. And finally, I'm humble. Now, we're going to unpack this today. We unpacked this last week, but we're going to unpack this today. And I want to make it clear now, and that is that both of these are biblically based. Let's look at it this way. The birth of the concept of being sent, and in the scriptures, it's really referred to as being commissioned a lot. But it began with the Hebrew preachers, the prophets, and then that message became flesh in Jesus, and then to Jesus' disciples. Now, it's my understanding that the whole understanding of chosenness took a detour around Jesus and was recaptured in the 4th century when the Roman emperor accepted Jesus Christ as his personal savior, and all of a sudden the whole concept of chosenness re-emerged in our history. But it's my understanding and my bias, if you will, that chosenness is not really represented in the ministry and life of Jesus. It's a detour around Jesus resurrected in the 4th century. Whereas the whole understanding of being commissioned and sent, at the heart of the preachers of the Hebrew tradition, to Jesus and the disciples today. And so we're going to unpack this in 3 steps, 4 different times, okay? We're going to look at the message of a prophet. Then we're going to look and see how that message is in the life and teachings of Jesus. And then we're going to look at what that looks like today. So we're going to do that 4 times. And so we begin with the best known minor prophet of Jonah. Now, Jonah is one of these stories that the message is most of the time lost in the story. Okay, the story is so vivid and romantic, Jonah being in the belly of the whale, but that's not the message. The message of Jonah was that he was being sent to share the message of love with the evil city of Nineveh. And I mean, Nineveh was a bad, bad deal. All kinds of immorality. And Jonah and the Hebrew people knew that, but Jonah didn't want to go. And so the message is Jonah was sent, but Jonah was reluctant to go. But lo and behold, God got God's way. And lo and behold, the people of Nineveh heard the message and changed their ways. Now that's the message of Jonah, a reluctant servant, a reluctant person sent to serve an evil city. And lo and behold, he didn't want to go, but he was sent anyway, and they heard the message and changed their ways. It's the message of being sent. Now look at the life of Jesus. As we look at Jesus' life, here we see his relationship with his disciples. And as Maddie shared several weeks ago in a sermon, the whole understanding of going. And Jesus' message at the end of our experience of Jesus on earth was, go and make disciples. He sent his followers in his ministry, and after the resurrection, the message was the same. Commissioned, being sent, go. So it's the message of Jonah, the message of Jesus to be sent. What does that look like today? I was in Angola in 1992 and was there on a Sunday, and my host suggested that I might be interested in going to a meeting before worship that they were having with a person that gave his life to Jesus the week before. And it just was a fascinating experience. There was this man, probably middle-aged, maybe in his 50s. And so the elders, men and women, gathered around him and asked him how that last week was compared to the previous week. And he shared his joy in living. And then they said, who did you share your story with? And I was interested and said, here's a person a week after that experience, and the church members are asking him, with whom did he share his story? And he smiled and tears came out of his eyes. And he said, I shared it with my nephew and his friend, and they're both here this morning. Maybe that's the reason why the church in Angola is doubling in size every 5 or 6 years. Because they understand that when you experience the love of God, you're immediately sent to share your story. Not chosen, but sent. So that's Jonah. But let's go to another prophet that is better known for the message, because when we think about Micah, we just think about chapter 6, verse 8, what does the Lord require of you? But it's interesting to understand the context of Micah's preaching. There was two kingdoms among the people of God at that time, Israel and Judah. And the northern kingdom was Israel, and they had already been on the slippery slope and messed up in so many ways. Their transgressions were great. And Judah was still surviving, but then Micah comes along with the message, folks, you're in trouble too. You're messing up too. And so in that message with the people, he talked about what the real test was in terms of whether or not people would remain faithful or fall as a kingdom. And the test question was, what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. That was the test of faithfulness for Micah. Okay, Jesus, 700 years later, came along, picking up that theme of Micah in a powerful way. For if you just want to start with Matthew 5-7 that we've referred to previously, look at the Beatitudes. Blessed are the peacemakers, or happy are the peacemakers. Happy are the meek. All of a sudden, communicating a message, folks, you're not special, but you're different. The meek will inherit the earth. The peacemakers are the way of faithfulness. Not special, but different. And so Jesus picked up this message of Micah, and what does that look like today? Well, this last week, I interviewed an African-American police officer in Minneapolis. And he was talking about being on the side of the protesters and being a member of the department. And they said, what do you do with all of this? And he said, well, I think I must, first of all, put aside my ego. Put it aside. Step back. Listen. And treat every person on the force and on the street as my equal. That's what Micah's message looks like today. That's what Jesus' message looks like today in a human being, in the context of where our culture's been in the last 2 weeks. Not considering yourself to be special, but considering yourself to be an equal with all. And then we take a journey with Hosea. Sort of like Jonah, another personal story, and we read Hosea and we get all caught up in Hosea's ordained marriage by God, that he married his wife, and then his wife becomes unfaithful, becomes a prostitute, has a worthless kind of existence, and is in abusive situation of being abused by all. She's a prostitute. And in that day, there was a marketplace for prostitutes that men would just bid for the services in a public auction, if you will. And lo and behold, the message came from God to Hosea. go to the marketplace and purchase your wife back on an auction of prostitutes. That regardless of the nature or the degree of unfaithfulness, you can still respond to unfaithfulness with love. Now that's a powerful message. Jesus didn't leave that message alone. Jesus, in his own life, lived that out. For indeed, in his journey to the cross, he encountered all kinds of unfaithfulness with his disciples, with the establishment, whether it be the Jewish religious leaders or the Roman religious political leaders. Faced all kinds of unfaithfulness. And indeed, how did he respond? He responded with love. And in Jesus' message, they said, how many times you forgive? Once, twice? No, he said 70 times 70, which in the Greek language, numerology means infinity. You never stop. Or the woman taken in adultery. They had a right by law to stone her to death. And he said, the one of you that is without sin can cast the first stone. No one threw the stone. And he encouraged the woman to go and live her life in a more meaningful way. Now, what does that look like today? I referred several weeks ago to the book Amish Faith. That indeed, the Amish, after experiencing the killing of their children in their community school, they forgave the family, the killer. And one of the quotes in that book is that the refusal to forgive is the last chapter of faith. You see, the message of Hosea, the message of Jesus was not I'm going to relish my privileges and my promises, but regardless of the situation, I'm free to love. Now let's look at the fourth one. Isaiah. We talked about Isaiah last week, and the message was so clear. The people called the people of God were in Babylon. They were in captivity. They had lost their land. They had lost their honor. They had lost their prestige. They didn't experience any of the promises. They were in bad shape. And Isaiah preached the idea that instead of being a nation superior, instead of being spatial, what we're called to be is a leaven in the lump in society, if you will, to be servants, to be suffering servants, suffering on behalf of others, not suffering as something that happens to us, but suffering for the other. And as I answered Blair last week, what does this look like? A bruised reed you will not break, a dimly burning wick you will not quench. And all of a sudden, the mind and the eyes of the Hebrew people were encouraged by Isaiah to look to the poor, to look to the outcasts as those for whom they could suffer and serve. And what did Jesus do with this message? Well, of course, he picked it up and ran with it. And we read the scriptures and we read the words that Jesus had the multitudes following him. But if you look at that word in Greek, it's got a different meaning. It doesn't mean there's a lot of people. It means the marginalized. The marginalized were those that Jesus suffered for. And indeed, we know that Jesus had a preference for the poor, for the lepers, for the outcasts of society. And that was the message of Jesus. But what does that mean today? Well, I think we've seen it all over this land, all over this world, friends. And that's the sign, no justice, no peace. Indeed, we've seen a display of people on the streets and in living rooms and in conversations around our culture of people saying, we need a different kind of vision, a vision that is horizontal, that we look out to people and receive their sight horizontally. The time is over when we can look down on someone, and the time is over when someone has to look up at someone else. The message of Isaiah and the message of Jesus. What does that look like today? Maybe a new kind of vision, horizontal rather than vertical. Indeed, let's remember on this journey of faith as individuals that we do have a choice. We have a choice to understand we're chosen, or we have a choice to understand that we are sent. And indeed, I simply want to leave you with two things. First of all, I want to leave you with a song that we sing from time to time. Indeed, it goes like this: it only takes a spark to get a fire going, and soon all those around can warm up in its glowing. Maybe the Angolan's nephew and his friends. That's how it is with God's love. Once you've experienced it, it's you spread that love to everyone because you want to pass it on. A great hymn that represents this as an alternative to understanding of faith. And then I leave you with just one simple question, and that is, what is there to gain from being chosen? And what is there to gain from being sent? That's a question that all of us in our journey of faith must answer, not one time, but I think every day, every week, as we take the journey of faith with others, having experienced God's love. What is your choice? Thank you.